Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, Departure at Dusk. The Aegean star lay at her berth in Southampton docks like a great white palace afloat, her tiers of decks rising proudly against the autumn sky. All around her bustled the noise of departure, stevedores shouting instructions, trunks hoisted with creaking pulleys, motorcars gliding up to the quay, and porters scurrying to and fro beneath mountains of luggage. Families pressed forward for last embraces, while excited children clung to the railings, waving flags that fluttered in the chill evening breeze. Into this scene of commotion and colour came a figure whose neatness seemed untouched by the disorder about him. Hercule Poirot, small, dapper, and immaculately dressed in a grey suit with a perfectly folded pocket handkerchief, descended from a cab and paused at the foot of the gangway. His moustache, so carefully waxed that one might imagine he consulted it before speaking, twitched with satisfaction as his gaze swept over the majestic ship. "It is magnificent, Hastings," he declared, his accent lending a precise rhythm to every word. "A floating hotel of the most modern kind. Observe how the lines are graceful yet strong, the windows gleam as though each has been polished individually. Truly, it is an enterprise ordered with intelligence." His companion, tall, broad, and good-natured, glanced upward with boyish enthusiasm. "She's a beauty, Poirot. 10 days to Alexandria in such comfort, well, it's not what I'm used to after the trenches, I can tell you." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "You speak as though war and luxury were natural opposites. Yet for me, order is the essential quality, whether on battlefield or ballroom floor." He straightened the line of his cuff and added softly, "And on such a ship, mon ami, where so many personalities are confined together, it is inevitable that the human drama will play itself out." "Dash it all, Poirot, don't start predicting mysteries before we've even left port," Hastings protested, though his eyes twinkled. "We're supposed to be on holiday." But Poirot's eyes had already narrowed in quiet observation. For he had noticed, ascending the gangway just ahead of them, a tall, imperious woman clad in sable. At her throat glittered a necklace of deep blue sapphires, catching the last rays of the setting sun. The jewels were bold, almost ostentatious, and drew gasps of admiration from nearby passengers. "That, Hastings," Poirot murmured, "is a lady who enjoys attention. And where attention goes, envy follows close behind." The lady in question turned as though aware of his scrutiny. She possessed a proud, hawkish face softened by age, and eyes that carried both command and melancholy. At her side walked a young woman, perhaps 25, whose fair hair was arranged in a simple chignon. Unlike her aunt, the girl wore a modest traveling suit, her expression subdued. She glanced once at the sapphires with an air that was not admiration but rather resignation, as though she had grown weary of their constant display. Poirot, missing no shade of emotion, tucked the observation carefully into his orderly mind. They passed into the ship's grand reception hall, with its polished brass, sweeping staircases, and a chandelier that trembled gently with the vibration of engines below. The purser, a harried-looking man with spectacles perched on his nose, stood directing passengers to their cabins. Behind him, stewards hurried with baggage, while a trio of musicians struck up a waltz to soothe the clamour of embarkation. Hastings nudged Poirot. "Look there, Lady Constance Harwood. I've read of her in the Times. Old family, great fortune, all tied up in land and diamonds." "Ah," Poirot replied with delicate satisfaction. "So the sapphires have a name to match their brilliance. Lady Constance. And the young lady with her?" "Her niece, I fancy. Eleanor Harwood. Parents both dead. I expect she's the heiress in waiting." Poirot's moustache twitched once more. "Then there, Hastings, we have already the beginnings of a little tableau. the wealthy matriarch, the dependent niece, the jewels that are paraded for the admiration, and perhaps the covetousness, of all. Hastings laughed. You really cannot help yourself, can you? Well, I'll wager nothing happens on this trip but deck games and too much food. Poirot only raised his eyebrows, as if to say that time would tell. Dinner that first evening was served in the glittering first-class salon. Tables draped in white linen sparkled with crystal and silver. Gentlemen in black tie conversed over oysters and champagne, while ladies paraded their gowns in shades of emerald, ivory, and rose. Conversation was of politics, the latest theatrical success in London, and the merits of travelling eastward in autumn rather than spring. Lady Constance occupied a central table, her sapphires catching the lamplight as though they burned with an inner fire. She spoke in a voice meant to be overheard, recounting to her companions how her collection contained pieces once owned by Catherine the Great. Her niece sat dutifully at her side, speaking rarely, her gaze lowered to her plate. At a nearby table, Poirot and Hastings dined with polite interest. Poirot's eyes, however, were never still. They travelled from face to face, weighing expressions, cataloguing gestures. He noticed how the French singer, Madame Larocque, allowed her eyes to linger on the sapphires with something close to longing. How Mr. Henry Phelps, a well-dressed man with a gambler's easy charm, leaned forward whenever Lady Constance spoke, his smile a little too eager. And how the purser, moving about the room with lists in hand, glanced more than once at the jewels with a look not of admiration, but of unease. After the toasts were raised and dessert plates cleared, Lady Constance stood. With a dramatic gesture, she touched her necklace. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, you may admire, if you please. These sapphires have travelled with me from London to Rome, from Cairo to Bombay. They are quite the envy of Europe, and I say with pride, none has dared yet to deprive me of them. Laughter rippled through the salon, yet Poirot's keen ears caught the undercurrents. A muttered word here, a sharp intake of breath there. He glanced at Hastings. Do you see, mon ami? Already the stage is set. Vanity, envy, dependence, secrecy. The jewels are not alone in glittering, so too do the eyes of those who covered them. Still making mysteries out of shadows, Hastings murmured, though his voice carried a hint of unease. Poirot smoothed his napkin, eyes shining with quiet certainty. It is not shadows I observe, Hastings, but details. And in the details lies the truth. Always. Above them, the great ship pressed onward into the channel, her engines thrumming like the heartbeat of a creature alive. The lights of England faded into the night, and with them the last certainty of solid ground. A voyage had begun, not only across the waters, but into the secret depths of human nature, where, as Poirot well knew, danger and desire often shared the same cabin. Chapter 2: A Crime in the Night. The Aegean star had sailed smoothly through her second day at sea, the air crisp with the tang of the channel winds. Passengers had begun to settle into the steady rhythm of shipboard life, promenading on the upper deck, taking tea in the lounge, or watching the gulls wheel in the fading light as the coast of France slipped behind them. Poirot, who disliked the brisk air, had spent the afternoon in the card-room, engaged in a quiet game of patience. Hastings, by contrast, had attempted a few rounds of deck tennis and returned flushed, declaring the sea air bracing. Poirot smiled indulgently. You English and your sports. For myself, I find it more restorative to exercise the little grey cells than to dash about with rackets. The evening passed with music in the lounge, a recital by Madame Larocque, whose clear soprano voice drew a crowd of admirers. Lady Constance Harwood, seated prominently with her sapphires ablaze at her throat, received many compliments. She basked in them like a queen accepting homage. Eleanor, her niece, sat dutifully beside her, silent, her hands clasped in her lap. Poirot noted that she did not applaud with enthusiasm, nor did her eyes light with pride. At 11:30, Poirot retired to his cabin, murmuring that the sea had grown rough and that a man must protect his digestion. Hastings lingered a little longer, drawn into conversation with a group of fellow travelers about the merits of Egyptian antiquities. The ship settled into the hush of midnight, the rhythmic pulse of engines lulling most to sleep. It was some time after 2 o'clock when the tranquility shattered. A shrill cry echoed down the corridor of B deck, followed by hurried footsteps and the urgent knocking on doors. Hastings sprang up and was halfway to his boots when Poirot, already dressed in a silk dressing gown, opened his door. "What is it, mon ami?" Poirot asked, his voice calm though his eyes were sharp. "It sounded like a woman's scream," Hastings replied, fastening his collar. From down toward Lady Constance's cabin. Together they followed the commotion. Passengers in night attire crowded the passage, whispering anxiously. At the center of the stir stood Lady Constance herself, pale beneath her rouge, her hands trembling. A maid wrung her hands beside her, while Eleanor leaned against the doorframe, ashen. "The sapphires!" Lady Constance cried. "My jewel case, forced open. They are gone, every one of them." The captain, hastily summoned, appeared in uniform with the purser at his side. He spoke firmly, reassuring those gathered that the matter was under control, but his eyes betrayed unease. A theft of such magnitude could not be allowed to disrupt the voyage. Poirot stepped forward with a small bow. "Captain, perhaps I may be of service. I am Hercule Poirot." Recognition flickered across the captain's face, followed by relief. "By all means, Monsieur Poirot. I've heard of your reputation. We must be discreet, no panic among the passengers." "Just so," Poirot agreed. He entered Lady Constance's cabin, where the jewel case lay open upon the dressing table. The lock bore a fine scratch, as though skillfully picked. Inside, the velvet lining was bare, save for a few tiny clasps that once held the necklace in place. Poirot bent closer. On the soft fabric lay a single strand of hair, pale, fine, unmistakably blonde. He lifted it with delicate fingers, holding it up to the light. His eyes flicked briefly to Eleanor, whose fair hair was gathered neatly at the nape of her neck. She avoided his gaze. "Tell me, madam," Poirot asked gently, "when did you last see the jewels?" "Before dinner," Lady Constance replied. "I locked them away myself. No one touched that case but me." "And the key?" "Here," she said, drawing it from a chain at her wrist. Poirot examined it. "Untampered with." The maid stepped forward nervously. I polished the dressing table before dinner, sir." "The case was locked then?" "I swear it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then the work was done between dinner and now. Tell me, madam, who entered this room after dinner?" "No one," Lady Constance declared. Then, after a pause, except Eleanor. "She came to fetch my shawl." All eyes turned to the young woman, who flushed scarlet. "Yes, I came in for a moment," she admitted. "But the case was closed, I didn't touch it." The captain cleared his throat. "Could anyone have entered during the concert?" The purser frowned. "Our stewards are vigilant, sir. No stranger could loiter here unseen." Poirot's eyes swept the cabin once more. His gaze lingered on the window, bolted tight against the sea spray. Then on the carpet, where faint indentations marked the passage of someone's shoes. Small shoes, narrow-soled. Poirot murmured, tapping his lips. "The thief has skill, subtlety, and courage. But even the cleverest criminal leaves behind a trace." Lady Constance wrung her hands. "Monsieur Poirot, you must find them. They are worth more than money, they are Harwood heirlooms. My father wore them, my husband too. I could not bear it if they are lost." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Rest assured, madam." Hercule Poirot does not permit precious things to vanish into the night. Already, the clues are here before us. He gestured to the blonde hair, the scratch on the lock, the slight displacement of the carpet beneath the dressing table. Hastings frowned. But surely, Poirot, that means... Poirot silenced him with a finger to his lips. Patience, Hastings. We must not jump to conclusions. The hair may be planted, the scratch made to mislead, the carpet moved by accident. Always, we must distinguish between what is evidence and what is design. The captain gave brisk orders. The purser was to ensure no luggage left the ship, and stewards were to keep watch discreetly. The passengers were reassured that nothing untoward had occurred, though whispers rippled through the corridors as they returned to their cabins. Later, when the excitement had calmed and the door was locked once more, Poirot lingered with Hastings in the empty lounge. He sat with perfect composure, adjusting the crease of his trousers. "Well, Hastings," he said quietly, "already the pattern begins to form. You saw how the niece blushed, how the purser fumbled with his words, how the gambler Phelps leaned too eagerly at dinner. All these are threads, but which thread leads to the jewel, and which only to distraction? That, mon ami, is the art of detection." Hastings lit his pipe, shaking his head. "It seems dashed mysterious to me. But if anyone can make sense of it, Poirot, it's you." Poirot smiled modestly. Yes, it is so. For the human mind, Hastings, it is like the deck of this ship, orderly, constructed, yet filled with hidden cabins. And we must open each in turn to discover who hides behind the door. Outside, the night wind whipped across the decks, and the ocean stretched dark and unknowable. Somewhere aboard the great vessel, the sapphires lay concealed. But for Hercule Poirot, the voyage had only just begun. Chapter 3, Suspicions Afloat. The dawn following the theft broke pale and uncertain, a veil of mist lying low upon the sea. The Aegean star cut her way steadily southward, her decks glistening with dew. But while the ship moved forward with the inevitability of tide and compass, her passengers carried themselves with an unease that had not been present the day before. A great theft, whispered of behind fans and newspapers, had disturbed the serene luxury of the voyage. Hercule Poirot, however, greeted the morning with his usual precision. He emerged from his cabin perfectly groomed, his moustaches gleaming, his patent leather shoes polished though they had not touched so much as a smudge of dust. Hastings, by contrast, yawned as he joined him for breakfast. "I hardly slept a wink," Hastings confessed, buttering his toast with more energy than accuracy. "The whole thing is confoundedly mysterious. The jewels vanished from a locked case, in a locked cabin, and not a soul admits to having seen anything. I'll wager the thief is clever enough to keep them hidden until we dock." Poirot stirred his chocolate thoughtfully. "Ah, mon ami, but it is one thing to steal. It is another thing entirely to conceal. In theft, there is always a risk, the need to hide, to mislead, to deceive. And in these actions, the thief betrays himself." Hastings shook his head. "You make it sound so simple. But half the ship could have wanted those sapphires. Did you see how they sparkled under the lights?" Poirot leaned back, his gaze sweeping the breakfast salon. "Precisely. They sparkled not only in the lamps but in the eyes of those who coveted them. Come, Hastings. Let us observe. Already I have in my mind for persons of interest." He raised a discreet finger as he spoke. "First, Mademoiselle Eleanor, the niece. She alone possesses the fair hair that matches our little clue. And she has motive, perhaps. Dependence can breed resentment, Hastings. To live in the shadow of wealth is a burden." Hastings frowned. "She seemed a decent sort to me. Quiet, dutiful. Not the type to play at jewel theft." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Appearances, mon ami, can be the most deceptive of all. Second, Poirot continued, there is Monsieur Phelps, the gambler. I observed his conversation with Lady Constance. His eyes lingered on the sapphires, but not with admiration. With calculation. His funds are low, his habits expensive. A fortune in jewels could restore him at once. I thought as much myself, Hastings admitted. Third, Madame Larocque, the singer. She is flamboyant, yes, but beneath the laughter I sense desperation. And she has the fingers of an artist, delicate enough, perhaps, to pick a lock with subtlety. And the fourth. The purser, Poirot said quietly. Responsible for security, yet so nervous, so defensive when questioned. Either he is weak of character, or he fears discovery. Hastings sighed. That gives us 4, but how are we to narrow it down? Poirot dabbed his lips with a napkin. By patience, by method, and by psychology. Come, we will begin at once. The niece. Eleanor Harwood was found on the promenade deck, leaning against the rail, gazing out at the misty horizon. Her face, pale in the grey light, seemed thoughtful rather than distressed. Poirot approached with gentle courtesy. Mademoiselle, forgive the intrusion. May I join you? She nodded, though without enthusiasm. You are troubled, I think, Poirot observed. The events of last night, they weigh heavily. Eleanor pressed her lips together. My aunt is distraught. She loves those sapphires more than anything. Poirot tilted his head. And you, mademoiselle? Do you love them? Her blue eyes flickered to him. They are beautiful, yes. But they represent something I cannot admire, my aunt's vanity, her pride. She displays them like trophies. They remind me of my position. Dependent upon her. Poirot prompted gently. A faint flush colored her cheeks. Yes. I have no fortune of my own. I am at her mercy. But, Monsieur Poirot, I would never stoop to stealing from her. You must believe me. Poirot bowed slightly. I believe nothing, mademoiselle, until the truth presents itself. Forgive me, it is my nature. She turned away, and as she did, Poirot noted the faint fragrance of jasmine that clung to her scarf. A memory stirred in his mind, the velvet pouch discovered with its ghost of perfume. He filed the observation away. The gambler. Mr. Henry Phelps was encountered in the smoking room, hunched over a deck of cards though no one else had yet joined him. His eyes brightened when he saw Hastings. Care for a hand, old chap? Phelps asked breezily. But Poirot waved the offer aside. Monsieur, it is said you are fond of risk. And risk, when it fails, brings debts. Is it not so? Phelps chuckled uneasily. What of it? A gentleman's amusements cost money, true enough. But you suggest, perhaps, that I might relieve Lady Constance of her sapphires to pay my bills. Poirot's moustaches twitched. You put the matter bluntly, monsieur. Well, it's absurd. I wouldn't know how to open a jewel case if my life depended on it. And besides, he added with forced lightness, I'm more interested in winning at cards than pocketing necklaces. Poirot gave a polite smile but noticed how the man's fingers tapped restlessly on the table, as though itching for a game, or for something more. The singer. Madame Larocque received Poirot in her cabin, clad in a silk dressing gown, her black hair falling loose around her shoulders. She laughed lightly when the subject of the sapphires was raised. Ah, monsieur, they are magnificent, yes. But far too heavy for my neck. I prefer jewels of delicacy, something to suit the artist's temperament. She sighed dramatically. Besides, I could never afford such things. A singer's life is all applause and little security. Poirot bowed. And yet, Madam, the thief who possesses them now has no more security than before. Only a greater danger. For the briefest instant, her laughter faltered. Poirot's sharp eyes caught the flicker, though she recovered at once with another peal of merriment. The purser! The purser was cornered in his office, surrounded by ledgers. His hands shook as he pushed his spectacles up his nose. Monsieur Poirot, I assure you, I am devoted to my duties. The safety of the passengers and their property is paramount. But, well, you must understand, if word spreads too far, the reputation of the Aegean star could suffer. Poirot nodded gravely. And for that reason, you are uneasy. But tell me, monsieur, why was a fragment of cloth bearing your insignia discovered in a locked cabin on the second deck? The purser stammered, colour draining from his face. I cannot explain. Perhaps a steward misplaced it. Perhaps someone wishes to cast suspicion upon me. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. Yes, perhaps. That evening, Poirot and Hastings walked the deck beneath a sky now cleared of mist, the sea glimmering darkly under the stars. Well, Poirot, Hastings said, they all seem dashed suspicious to me. Eleanor resents her aunt, Phelps needs money, Madame Larocque is half in love with Jules, and the purser's as nervous as a schoolboy. Poirot smiled faintly. Yes, Hastings. Each one has the motive, the opportunity, or the temperament. But only one has all three. And there lies the truth. He tapped his forehead with a finger. The little grey cells, Hastings. They begin to stir. And as the great ship pressed on across the waters, Poirot's mind, too, charted its careful course, through lies, secrets, and the subtle currents of human desire. Chapter 4, A Puzzling Discovery. The Aegean star awoke on her third morning at sea to a brisk wind and a restless sea. Waves slapped against her flanks with a steady rhythm, sending spray across the lower decks. The passengers, however, were not preoccupied with the weather. Whispers still trailed from corridor to corridor. The sapphires, Lady Constance's heirlooms, had vanished as if swallowed by the ocean itself. Poirot, after his customary breakfast of rolls and chocolate, was summoned by a flustered steward to the starboard deck. Hastings followed, his curiosity piqued. "There's something odd, sir," the steward explained breathlessly. "One of the men was checking the lifeboats this morning, routine, you understand, and he found a pouch tucked beneath the cover of number 6. Thought you'd want to see it at once." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Ah, yes. A pouch beneath a lifeboat. Already it interests me greatly. The pouch." The lifeboat was swung neatly in its davits, a canvas cover lashed down against spray. The steward lifted the flap and drew out a small velvet pouch, dark blue, its cord frayed. Hastings whistled. "By Jove! This must be them." The thief got nervous and stashed the necklace here. Poirot, however, did not so quickly celebrate. He accepted the pouch delicately between finger and thumb, turning it as though it might explode. Then he loosened the cord. From within tumbled a cascade of jewels that gleamed dully in the morning light. But they were not sapphires. Hastings blinked. "Glass! They're nothing but paste. Poorly cut, too. Not worth a sovereign." Poirot smiled faintly. "Exactment. Someone has been industrious. The thief prepared these false jewels in advance. He did not wish Lady Constance to discover the theft immediately. Had she not opened the case herself at 2 o'clock in the morning, the deception might have lasted until we docked." "Clever devil," Hastings muttered. But if the false ones were meant to fool her, why leave them hidden under a lifeboat? Poirot raised a finger. "Because, mon ami, something disturbed the plan. The thief feared discovery and abandoned the substitution. Instead, he, or she, relied upon haste. This, you see, is the psychology of panic. He lifted the pouch to his nose. And here, another clue. A scent, faint but distinctive. Hastings leaned closer. By Jove, it's perfume. Jasmine, isn't it? Poirot nodded. Very good, Hastings. Very good indeed. Perfume clings like guilt. And I recall one among our little cast who favours this fragrance. Hastings frowned. Eleanor. Poirot merely smiled. Lady Constance's fury. Lady Constance Harwood received the news with outrage. When shown the pouch, she struck the table with her hand, her rings flashing. Paste! I am insulted, Monsieur Poirot. Do you hear me? Insulted. That someone would dare to palm me off with such rubbish, oh, it is intolerable. Her niece Eleanor sat quietly in the corner, pale as parchment. Poirot watched her discreetly. Not once did she lift her eyes to the pouch. It means, Lady Constance, Poirot said smoothly, that the theft was planned with foresight. But the thief's plan was interrupted. Therefore, we must ask, who had both the foresight to prepare and the fear to abandon? Lady Constance snorted. That gambler fellow, Phelps. Always sniffing about for money. Or that Frenchwoman, the singer. She's been eyeing the sapphires from the moment we sailed. Mark my words, Monsieur Poirot, the criminal is among them. Poirot inclined his head, concealing a smile. Lady Constance, like many, was too ready to believe what her emotions suggested. Yet he filed away her vehemence. Anger, too, was a clue. Madame Larocque. Later that afternoon, Poirot contrived to pass Madame Larocque on the promenade. She was wrapped in a sable stole, her lips crimson against the wind. When she greeted him, he caught again a trace of jasmine, though mingled with another heavier scent. You have heard, madam, of the pouch beneath the lifeboat? Poirot asked. Her eyes widened dramatically. Mon Dieu! On a ship at sea, thieves, smugglers, it is too much. I shall never sleep again. You are afraid? Poirot asked softly. She placed a hand upon her bosom. Of course, monsieur. Such things make me nervous. Perhaps I should keep my jewels with me at all times. Poirot bowed slightly. Perhaps. But perfume, madam, is also a jewel of sorts. It clings. It betrays. For just an instant her smile faltered. Poirot, always alert to such flickers, tucked the moment neatly into his mental files. The gambler. Henry Phelps reacted differently. When shown the pouch, he laughed heartily. Well, that's dashed funny. Someone went to the trouble of making copies, and then didn't even use them. I'd say we're dealing with a bungler, Poirot, not a master criminal. Poirot smiled thinly. Or perhaps a master criminal who made one mistake. Phelps shrugged. Well, if you want my opinion, the sooner we dock the better. I've had enough drama for one voyage. But Poirot observed how his hands trembled ever so slightly as he lit his cigarette. The purser. Poirot next sought the purser. The man's office smelled of ink and salt. He was pale, his spectacles misted from the damp air. This discovery under the lifeboat, Poirot said, is most inconvenient for you, no? The purser spread his hands helplessly. It makes us look careless, Monsieur Poirot. If word spreads among the passengers, the company's reputation will suffer terribly. And yet, I cannot explain it. How could a pouch be placed there without a steward noticing? That is precisely what interests me, Poirot murmured. The lifeboats are checked regularly, are they not? Yes, sir, every morning. Then the pouch must have been placed there only last night. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The thief acted swiftly, under cover of darkness. A bold move. Yet boldness is often the mask of desperation. Hastings' doubts. That evening, Poirot and Hastings walked the deck together, the ship rolling gently underfoot. Passengers strolled in twos and threes, their whispers rising and falling like the sea itself. Hastings puffed at his pipe. "I don't like it, Poirot. Everything points to Eleanor, the hair, the perfume, her opportunity to fetch the shawl. And yet I can't believe it of her. She hasn't the nerve." Poirot glanced at him, eyes twinkling. Nerve, Hastings, is often hidden beneath timidity. A desperate heart can achieve much. But remember, what seems obvious may be planted to deceive. The criminal may wish us to think of Eleanor, while the truth lies elsewhere. He paused, gazing out at the dark waters. This discovery of the pouch is most revealing. It tells us that our thief is not content merely to steal. He wishes also to mislead, to weave a little drama. And in such vanity lies the thread we must follow. A subtle observation. As they turned back toward the lounge, Poirot halted suddenly. A steward had passed carrying a tray of luggage labels to be stamped. Among them, Poirot's sharp eyes caught one marked with Lady Constance's cabin number. The trunk to which it belonged bore faint scratches near the lock, scratches of the same kind Poirot had seen upon the jewel case. "Curious," he murmured softly. "Very curious indeed. Someone has been practicing." Hastings looked puzzled. "Practicing? You mean?" Poirot smiled enigmatically. "Patience, Hastings. Soon the pattern will be complete. Already, the little grey cells are at work." And with that, he turned, leaving Hastings to follow, bewildered, as the great ship pressed onward through the restless waves, carrying within her steel walls a secret that grew more tangled by the hour. Chapter 5: Red Herrings and Revelations. By the fifth evening of the voyage, the atmosphere aboard the Aegean star had altered entirely. Where once there had been carefree chatter, now there were murmurs, cautious glances, and guarded tones. Wealthy ladies kept their jewels locked away, stewards moved about with harried expressions, and conversations faltered when Poirot passed by. For Hercule Poirot himself, the situation was most agreeable. His eyes gleamed with quiet amusement as he observed the shifting tides of human behavior. "Mon cher Hastings," he said over tea in the lounge, "already the theft has achieved what I always find fascinating. It has stripped away the mask of society. Watch carefully. When people believe themselves suspected, their true selves emerge." Hastings, ever the straightforward Englishman, frowned. "I'd rather the thief just handed back the sapphires and saved us all this fuss." Poirot chuckled softly. "Ah, you prefer the simple solution. But human nature is never simple, my friend. It is a web. And now, let us see who entangles themselves." Dinner in the Grand Salon. That evening, the captain hosted a formal dinner in the Grand Salon, hoping to restore calm. The room shimmered with chandeliers, the tables gleamed with silver, and the string quartet played in subdued tones. Yet beneath the glitter, tension simmered. Lady Constance sat resplendent in crimson silk, her neck conspicuously bare. She had refused to wear any jewelry, declaring loudly that she would not give thieves another chance. Her niece Eleanor accompanied her, pale and subdued, refusing to meet the eyes of fellow diners. Across the room, Henry Phelps, the gambler, was in high spirits, laughing too loudly at jokes and ordering champagne with reckless abandon. Madame Larocque, draped in sequins, offered lilting laughter that sounded slightly forced. The purser moved about the room with a notebook, his forehead shining with perspiration. Poirot observed each in turn, his moustaches twitching. He noticed how Eleanor's hands trembled as she lifted her glass, how Phelps's eyes darted toward the captain whenever the jewels were mentioned, how Madame Larocque dabbed at her neck with a perfumed handkerchief, and how the purser avoided Lady Constance's gaze altogether. Poirot's little experiment. At dessert, Poirot leaned across to Hastings. "Now, mon ami, you will see a small trick. Observe." He rose, tapped his spoon against his glass, and with perfect calm addressed the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, I beg a moment of your attention. The captain has agreed to a small measure. As of tomorrow morning, every cabin will be searched most thoroughly. The thief of the sapphires cannot conceal them for long. Soon, the jewels will be recovered." A murmur spread around the tables. Some passengers exchanged uneasy glances, others smiled in relief. Poirot sat down again, apparently unconcerned. But his sharp eyes had already recorded the reactions he sought. Eleanor stiffened, her face draining of colour. Phelps spilled a drop of wine, muttering an oath. Madame Leroux gave a shrill laugh and clutched her stole tighter about her shoulders. The purser dropped his pencil and stooped hastily to retrieve it, his ears reddening. Poirot leaned back, satisfied. Voila! We learn more in a moment of stress than in hours of conversation. Hastings whispered, "Dash it all, Poirot, they all looked guilty." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Precisely. A most instructive evening." Eleanor confides. Later that night, as passengers drifted toward the lounge for coffee and music, Eleanor Harwood slipped quietly from the salon. Poirot, ever watchful, followed at a discreet distance. He found her on the promenade deck, gazing out at the dark waves. "Miss Harwood," he said gently, "you are troubled." She turned quickly, startled. "Monsieur Poirot, you frightened me. Forgive me. But I think perhaps you would speak to me if only someone would ask. Is it not so?" Her lips trembled. "You make it sound as though I am guilty." Poirot inclined his head. "Not guilty, mademoiselle, burdened. There is a difference." She hesitated, then spoke in a low rush. "It is true, I resent my aunt. She controls every penny I spend. I am 25 and yet treated like a child. But I would not steal from her, Monsieur Poirot, truly I would not." Poirot's voice softened. "And yet, you conceal something. A secret weighs upon you. That much, I know." Eleanor looked away. "If I had a secret, it is mine alone. You must allow me that." Poirot bowed slightly. "But of course. Yet remember this, secrets are like shadows. They lengthen when light is cast upon them." She shivered and turned back to the sea. Poirot left her then, but the faint trace of jasmine perfume lingered on the night air. A visit to the smoking room. Meanwhile, Hastings had wandered into the smoking room, where Henry Phelps was holding court with a group of younger men. Cards and coins littered the table. Hastings, drawn by curiosity, lingered nearby. "Bad luck follows me like a blasted hound," Phelps was saying with a forced laugh. "But once we reached Alexandria, I'll turn it all around. A man can't be in debt forever, eh?" One of the men asked, "You've heard about the cabin searches?" Phelps scowled, his hand tightening around his glass. "Yes, and a damned nuisance it is. As though we're all criminals. I should think the thief would be clever enough to drop the stuff overboard by now." Hastings pricked up his ears. Later he reported this remark to Poirot, who listened with interest. To suggest that the jewels have gone into the sea, Poirot mused, is to prepare the idea in the minds of others. A little seed planted. Curious, is it not? Madame Leroux's dramatic gesture. The next morning brought a small scene. Madame Leroux swept into the lounge, clutching a brooch of emeralds to her breast. "I cannot bear it," she declared loudly. "I shall not keep my jewels in my cabin. I will wear them day and night until we arrive. Let the thief try to take them from me then." Passengers laughed nervously, but Poirot only raised his brows. Such drama, he reflected, was rarely without purpose. She wished to appear fearful, yet was perhaps only drawing attention from herself. The purser's anxiety. In the afternoon, Poirot paid another visit to the purser's office. The poor man was pale, his desk cluttered with papers. "Every passenger is pressing me for reassurance," he said miserably. "And now with these searches, oh, Monsieur Poirot, what if the sapphires are never found?" Poirot regarded him keenly. "Why does that prospect terrify you so? More than the others?" The purser mopped his brow. "Because it is my responsibility. I should have prevented it." And, he faltered, as though catching himself. Poirot said nothing, but the hesitation was duly noted. Poirot reflects. That evening, Poirot and Hastings sat once more upon the deck, the sea calm beneath a full moon. Hastings sighed. "Well, we're no nearer, are we?" Eleanor seems guilty but pitiful, Phelps looks desperate, Madame Larocque plays the actress, and the purser seems frightened of his own shadow. They can't all be guilty. Poirot smiled faintly. "No, mon ami. They cannot. But do you not see? The thief has scattered smoke before our eyes, red herrings, as you English call them. Yet amid the confusion, there are details that do not lie, a perfume that lingers, a hand that trembles, a word spoken too hastily. All these, when arranged in order, will reveal the pattern. And when that moment comes..." He touched his temple lightly. "The little grey cells will deliver the truth." Hastings puffed at his pipe, unconvinced. "Well, I only hope it's before Lady Constance has a fit. She seems determined to blame half the ship." Poirot chuckled softly. "Patience, Hastings. The solution draws nearer. Already, I see the edges of the tapestry. Soon we shall see the picture complete." And with that, he leaned back, watching the silver path of moonlight on the sea, while somewhere aboard the Aegean star, the thief waited, perhaps smug, perhaps anxious, but unaware that Hercule Poirot was quietly drawing the net tighter with every passing hour. Chapter 6: The Locked Cabin. The following morning dawned with sullen skies. Grey clouds hung low over the sea, and the Aegean star ploughed forward through waters that seemed darker than before. The promised searches of the cabins had begun at once, with stewards and officers moving methodically from door to door under the purser's supervision. Passengers grumbled but complied, surrendering keys and protesting innocence. Hercule Poirot, however, was not among the officials. He preferred to observe from a little distance, noting not merely the discoveries, for there were none of value, but the manner in which each passenger behaved when the sanctity of their private space was disturbed. "People, mon cher Hastings," he remarked, standing by the rail as the wind tugged at his immaculate coat, "reveal their souls not when they are guilty, but when they are inconvenienced. Watch closely. Suspicious behavior." Lady Constance, summoned first, thundered with indignation. "A violation of privacy. A disgrace. I demand compensation for this humiliation." She swept from her cabin while stewards examined every drawer and cushion. Nothing, of course, was found. Eleanor, in contrast, submitted quietly. She stood aside, twisting her hands together, while the stewards opened her small trunk and neatly folded gowns. Again, nothing. Yet her face remained pale and her eyes shadowed with worry. Phelps reacted with coarse irritation. "Waste of time," he barked. If the thief's got any sense, he's flung the stuff overboard already. He paced as the men checked his cases, his fingers drumming against the wall. Madame Larocque behaved with theatrical calm. She sat upon her bed, smoking a long cigarette, offering wry remarks in her accented English. "Search, gentlemen, search. You will find only dresses and a few poor trinkets. A singer's life is not so rich, you know. The stewards discovered nothing but sequined gowns and costume jewelry. When the purser's own cabin was reached, he insisted nervously on unlocking the door himself. His quarters were small and tidy, with neatly stacked ledgers and boxes of ship's documents. The search produced nothing unusual, yet Poirot noticed the man's forehead beaded with perspiration and his hands trembled so much he dropped his spectacles. An unexpected obstacle. By late morning, the search had covered nearly every passenger cabin on the upper decks. Only one remained unexamined, cabin 42, a small stateroom near the stern, usually kept vacant for emergencies. But when the stewards reached it, they found the door locked from within. "This is impossible," muttered the chief steward, rattling the handle. "No passenger has been assigned here." The purser arrived, face strained. "It must be empty," he declared. "It always is." "Perhaps the lock is faulty." "Listen," cried Hastings suddenly. From within came a faint scraping sound, like something shifting across the floor. Then silence. The stewards exchanged uneasy glances. The purser produced a master key and tried it. The lock resisted stubbornly. After several attempts, it yielded with a snap. The door swung inward. The empty cabin. At first glance, cabin 42 appeared deserted. The narrow bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn against the gloomy light. Yet upon the carpet lay a small wooden crate, its lid half prized open. Inside were strips of torn newspaper and packing straw. Poirot stepped forward, eyes glittering. "Ah! Here is a hiding place." But what was hidden? Hastings peered into the crate. "Nothing here now, Poirot." "It's empty." Poirot bent low, plucking a shred of velvet from among the straw. "See, Hastings. Blue velvet. Once there was a pouch here, I think." "Perhaps the pouch." The steward searched the room thoroughly, but there was no trace of the sapphires. Only one further item emerged, a monogrammed handkerchief tucked beneath the pillow. Its initials read HP. Hastings exclaimed, "Henry Phelps." The bounder must have used this cabin as his hiding place. Poirot raised a hand. "Not so fast, mon ami. A handkerchief may be left behind deliberately, n'est-ce pas? To point suspicion where one wishes it to fall." Reactions. When Phelps was confronted with the discovery, he roared with indignation. "A frame-up, that's what it is. Someone planted it there. You think I'd be fool enough to leave a handkerchief behind? Why, I'd sooner toss myself overboard." Lady Constance clapped her hands in triumph. "There you have it. I knew from the start the gambler was to blame." Madame Larocque smirked. "Always the English, so careless. They cannot even hide their crimes neatly." Eleanor said nothing at all. The purser looked bewildered. "I don't understand. That cabin is kept locked. Only crew should have keys. How could anyone have entered without my knowledge?" Poirot gave him a penetrating glance. "Indeed, how?" Poirot considers. Later, in the quiet of the observation lounge, Poirot sat with Hastings, fingers steepled. "Well, Poirot," Hastings said, "it seems clear enough. Phelps hid the sapphires in that crate, but when he saw the searches begin, he removed them and tried to shift the blame elsewhere. Only he was clumsy." Poirot shook his head gently. Non, Hastings. It is too convenient. Consider, the crate is left, the velvet shred, the handkerchief. All point most directly to Phelps. Too directly. It is the work of a dramatist, one who wishes us to draw the obvious conclusion. But the truth, I fancy, lies elsewhere. But the sounds we heard from inside the cabin. Ah, precisely. They prove that when we opened the door, the thief had already departed. A few seconds earlier, and we might have caught him, or her, red-handed. That, Hastings, was no coincidence. It was timing most deliberate. Hastings sighed. Well, if you ask me, Poirot, the whole ship's guilty. I'll be glad when we reach port. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Patience, mon ami. The end is nearer than you think. A quiet warning. That evening, as Poirot prepared for dinner, a note was slipped beneath his cabin door. It was written in a hurried hand, unsigned. Do not meddle further, or you will regret it. Hastings was outraged. The impudence. Threatening you, Poirot. We must tell the captain at once. Poirot merely folded the note neatly and placed it in his pocket. No, Hastings. This is encouraging. When the fox feels the hound close, he grows desperate. The threat tells me I am very near indeed to the truth. The locked box. That night, as a storm gathered outside, Poirot took a solitary stroll on the lower deck. There, beneath the moaning wind, he discovered a small metal box wedged behind a coil of rope. Its lock was broken. Inside lay nothing but scraps of paper, torn so small they could not be read. Poirot studied them by the lamplight. One bore the faint trace of a crest, Lady Constance's family arms. Another showed the corner of a jeweller's advertisement. Evidence destroyed, Poirot murmured. But not quickly enough. The thief grows careless. He closed the box and looked up at the dark sky. Soon, he whispered. Very soon. Conclusion of the chapter. By the time the storm broke, passengers huddled in the saloon, listening to the wind howl against the windows. Talk of the theft dominated every conversation. Some were certain Phelps was the culprit, others suspected Eleanor, a few whispered about the purser's strange behavior. Through it all, Poirot sat serenely in his chair, sipping chocolate, his eyes half closed as though asleep. But Hastings knew better. The little grey cells were working furiously. And somewhere, hidden aboard the Aegean star, the sapphires still lay concealed, awaiting the moment when Poirot would reveal the truth. Chapter 7. The Storm Breaks. That night the sea turned restless, as though stirred by some great unease. By dinner the Aegean star pitched and rolled so violently that the chandeliers swayed, and many passengers remained in their cabins, preferring seasickness to the peril of the grand salon. Outside, rain lashed the decks and the wind shrieked like some furious spirit. To Hercule Poirot, however, storms at sea were merely another form of theatre. Wrapped in his dressing gown, he sat serenely in the lounge, sipping hot chocolate while the vessel shuddered under each wave. Hastings, less tranquil, clutched at the armrests and muttered darkly. I say, Poirot, this ship feels like it's about to roll clean over. And on top of that, we've still got a jewel thief prowling about. I can't think of a worse combination. Poirot's moustaches twitched with amusement. Calm yourself, Hastings. The ship is strong, the captain capable. As for the thief, tonight, I believe, we shall see the mast slip at last. Panic in the night. At 9:30, a steward burst into the lounge, drenched from the rain. Sir! Monsieur Poirot! There's been another disturbance, cabin 42 again. Someone was seen slipping inside only moments ago. Hastings leapt up. Dash it all, let's catch them this time. They hurried through the swaying corridors, lamps swinging, the ship groaning under the storm. When they reached the stern passageway, a small crowd of passengers and crew had already gathered. The door of cabin 42 stood ajar. Poirot raised his hand. No one must enter until I say. He stepped forward with meticulous calm, his small frame seeming untouched by the storm's fury. Inside, the cabin was dim, lit only by a swinging lantern. The crate on the floor had been overturned. Papers and straw littered the carpet. And upon the bed, Hastings gasped. Good Lord! There lay Henry Phelps, sprawled across the blankets, a dark bruise upon his temple. His eyes fluttered open weakly. Attacked, someone struck me, his voice trailed into a groan. A convenient victim. Quick, fetch the doctor, someone cried. Poirot, however, merely examined the scene with narrowed eyes. He touched the bruise gently. A blow, yes, but not so severe. He will live. It is most convenient, is it not, that he is found here, in the very cabin where suspicion already points? Hastings frowned. You mean it was staged? My's OUI. Someone wishes us to believe that Phelps returned to retrieve the sapphires and was discovered by an accomplice or resisted capture. But it is too neat. The thief has become desperate. Phelps groaned again. I swear, Poirot, I don't know how I came here. Someone lured me, said they had a message from the purser. Next thing I know, I'm flat on my back. Poirot's gaze sharpened. From the purser, you say? The purser cornered. The purser was summoned at once. His face turned white as chalk when he heard Phelps's account. It is a lie. I sent no such message. I have no business with Mr. Phelps. But Poirot, watching closely, saw the sweat spring to his brow. Monsieur le Purser, he said softly, why do you tremble so? Is it fear of being accused, or fear that some truth is about to surface? I'm responsible for the ship's order, that is all, the purser stammered. If valuables go missing, it is my reputation at stake. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, your reputation. And perhaps more than that. Eleanor's desperation. As the crowd dispersed, Eleanor appeared suddenly at Poirot's side. Her face was drawn, her eyes wide with fear. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, you must stop. Do you not see? Whoever did this, whoever attacked Mr. Phelps, they will not stop at theft. They will harm others. They may harm you. Poirot regarded her gently. Mademoiselle, are you speaking from fear, or from knowledge? She shook her head desperately. Please, I cannot say more. But if you value your safety, leave this matter alone. And with that, she fled down the corridor before Hastings could protest. Hastings groaned. That settles it, Poirot. She knows something. I'd wager she's in it up to her neck. Poirot tapped his lip thoughtfully. Or perhaps she knows more than she wishes to admit, and fears for another. Madame Larocque's song. Later, when the storm abated slightly, Poirot and Hastings entered the lounge once more. Madame Larocque was there, seated at the piano, playing a melancholy tune. Passengers gathered, grateful for distraction. Poirot approached her. A beautiful melody, madam. Yet tinged with sadness. Is it a memory of home? She laughed lightly, though her fingers faltered on the keys. You are too perceptive, monsieur. Music is always memory. But tonight it is also fear. I cannot sleep with thieves about. Poirot bent closer. Or perhaps with guilt, madam? Perfume lingers, as I have told you before. It betrays where words conceal. Her smile faltered. She struck a discordant note and closed the piano with a snap. You are tiresome, monsieur, she said coldly, and swept from the room. Poirot reflects in the storm. When they were alone again, Hastings muttered, well, that was queer behavior. First Eleanor, now the singer. Everyone's acting guilty. Poirot folded his hands serenely. That, mon ami, is the genius of our thief. He, or she, creates confusion, scatters suspicion like chaff in the wind. But already, the wind clears. Tonight's events have shown me all I need. The pattern is complete. Hastings gaped. What, you've solved it? Poirot's moustaches twitched. I have. But a detective must not merely know. He must also demonstrate. Tomorrow, when the sea is calm, I shall convene our little company in the salon. There, the truth shall be revealed. A narrow escape. As they prepared to retire, Hastings suggested one last turn about the deck for fresh air. The storm had eased, but the ship still pitched and rolled. They walked together past the lifeboats when suddenly Hastings stumbled over a coil of rope. At that precise moment, a heavy spar crashed down from the rigging above, striking the deck where Hastings had stood. He stared, white-faced. Good Lord! If I hadn't tripped. Poirot examined the spar carefully. Its fastening had been loosened deliberately. He straightened, eyes like steel. You see, Hastings? The thief is desperate enough to attempt murder. It is time to end this charade. The gathering clouds. The rest of the night passed tensely. Stewards whispered of plots and dangers, passengers locked themselves in their cabins. Lady Constance demanded armed guards at her door. Phelps, nursing his bruised temple, cursed the day he ever boarded the ship. Eleanor kept to herself, avoiding every gaze. Madame Larocque sang softly behind closed doors, her voice haunting in the storm. And Poirot, in his cabin, polished his moustaches, laid out his cuffs with meticulous care, and smiled to himself. Tomorrow, he murmured, the curtain shall rise. And Hercule Poirot will reveal the final act. Chapter 8 of Poirot Explains. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the Aegean star gliding upon a sea as calm as polished glass. Sunlight spilled through the saloon windows, gilding the tables and chairs. Yet the passengers assembled there carried an air of unease. They had been summoned at Poirot's request, and none could mistake the significance. Lady Constance Harwood sat upright in her crimson gown, lips pressed tight with indignation. Eleanor, pale and restless, twisted a handkerchief in her lap. Henry Felt scowled, his bruised temple lending him the air of a wounded animal. Madame Larocque lounged with calculated ease, her dark eyes glittering. The purser shifted nervously in his chair, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Hastings hovered at Poirot's shoulder, as anxious as any. Poirot stood at the head of the room, his moustaches immaculate, his posture elegant. He inclined his head gravely. Mesdames et messieurs, we are assembled because the truth can no longer be hidden. The sapphires of Lady Constance have not flown into the sea, nor been spirited away by ghosts. They are here, upon this ship, and I shall tell you who stole them, and why. Poirot begins. He raised a finger. First, consider the facts. The sapphires were last seen at midnight, when Lady Constance replaced them in her case. By 2 o'clock, they were gone. The jewel case showed scratches, suggesting the use of a tool. A woman's hair was found upon the pillow. Later, a pouch of paste jewels was discovered hidden beneath a lifeboat, perfumed faintly with jasmine. And in cabin 42, long thought empty, we found an abandoned crate, velvet scraps, and a handkerchief bearing the initials HP. He let the list hang in the air, his eye sweeping over the group. All these things appeared to point in different directions. Too many directions. That, Miss Amos, is the first clue. Our thief is clever, oh, très clever, but also vain. He wished to scatter suspicion like confetti, to make fools of us all. But vanity, as I have often said, is the undoing of criminals. Clearing the innocent. Let us take them one by one, Poirot continued. Henry Phelps. You are reckless, indebted, and not above sharp practice at the card table. But you are not our thief. The handkerchief in cabin 42 was too obvious. The blow to your temple too neatly timed. You were used as a scapegoat. Phelps exhaled in relief, though he muttered, "Dash it, Poirot, I'm not exactly flattered." Poirot inclined his head. Then, Madame Larocque. Ah, you favored the perfume of jasmine, and indeed I smelled it in the pouch. But your perfume is layered with heavier notes. What I detected was pure, like jasmine, quite different. You played the role of the dramatic suspect with skill, madam, but you are innocent. Madame Larocque spread her hands with a laugh. What can I say, monsieur? I do so enjoy the drama. Poirot turned his gaze upon Eleanor. And you, mademoiselle? You had opportunity, yes. You fetched the shawl at midnight, you resented your aunt's control, you were frightened when the searches were announced. But fear does not equal guilt. You feared for another. You feared what you had guessed, but could not prove. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I thought, perhaps, but I was afraid to speak. Exactment, Poirot said gently. The purser. Which brings us, Poirot said, his voice sharpening, to you, Monsieur le Purser. The man started, his face paling. Me? But I, surely. Poirot raised a hand. From the first, I found your anxiety too great. You trembled, you sweated, you spoke of the company's reputation. But it was not reputation you feared to lose, it was your liberty. Only a crew member could have accessed cabin 42 without notice. Only you had the keys to every lock. And it was you who, under cover of your duties, placed the pouch beneath the lifeboat. The purser swallowed hard. That's absurd. I never? Poirot pressed on mercilessly. You thought to substitute the paste stones for the real sapphires. You had the pouch prepared, perfumed with jasmine oil from your own bottle. Yes, I discovered it later in your quarters, though you thought it hidden. But Lady Constance disturbed the plan by opening the case too soon. In panic, you abandoned the pouch beneath the lifeboat and concealed the real jewels in the crate of cabin 42. Later, when suspicion grew, you planted Phelps's handkerchief to divert attention. And when even that seemed precarious, you attempted to silence inquiry altogether, first by striking Phelps, then by loosening the spar that nearly killed my friend Hastings. A horrified murmur swept the room. The motive? Lady Constance demanded, but why? Why would he do such a thing? Poirot's eyes were cold. Because, madam, he was desperate. The purser has been speculating with passengers' funds, gambling away sums entrusted to the ship's accounts. I found traces of his forgery among the torn papers in the metal box upon the deck. The sapphires were his salvation. With them, he could flee, begin anew. But the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot stood in his way. The purser slumped in his chair, his face ashen. It is true, he whispered. All of it. I never meant violence, but when the searches began, I lost my head. I thought only of escape. The recovery. Poirot nodded to a steward, who brought forth a small leather valise. He opened it with a flourish. Inside lay the sapphires, glittering with cold blue fire. Gasps filled the room. I recovered them this very morning, Poirot explained. The purser hid them in a hollow beneath the floorboards of cabin 42. The storm loosened the panel, and a careful eye could see where it had been tampered with. Voila! Lady Constance clasped her hands in triumph. My sapphires! Safe at last! Monsieur Poirot, I am indebted to you beyond words. Poirot bowed. The thanks are unnecessary, madam. It is my duty, and my pleasure, to restore order. Poirot's final words. With the purser escorted away under guard, the passengers dispersed in a buzz of excitement. Hastings turned to Poirot, shaking his head in wonder. By Jove, Poirot, I should never have guessed. I was sure it was Eleanor, or perhaps that rogue Phelps. But you saw through it all. Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes twinkling. It is always the psychology, mon ami. The thief may disguise his actions, plant evidence, create red herrings. But he cannot disguise his fear. Fear leaves a shadow upon every gesture, every word. And once I observed that shadow upon the purser, the rest was inevitable. He smoothed his moustaches with satisfaction. Another little puzzle solved, Hastings. Another crime thwarted. And now, I think, a quiet voyage for the remainder of our journey. Perhaps even peace. Hastings chuckled. Peace with Lady Constance aboard? I doubt it. Poirot laughed softly. Ah, but peace enough for Hercule Poirot, and for the little grey cells, which may now take their rest. The ship sailed on under the bright sun, her passengers once more at ease, while deep within the calm heart of Hercule Poirot there glowed the quiet satisfaction of justice restored.